Welcome to Decentralized News, our weekly coverage of the major headlines in Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency space. I'm your host, Piter, as joined always by Ozzy. There's a lot to get to, so let's jump right in. Please do your own research. This is not financial advice. In breaking news this morning, we have pro-Bitcoin presidential candidate in Argentina, Javier Milei, won the primaries. Did you see this?
Yeah, I saw this earlier, and I mean, it's pretty big news because Argentina is considered to be one of the kind of best case countries for why they need Bitcoin. And other stories that I've seen have said they were at risk of kind of joining BRICS, but if they move towards Bitcoin, we could start seeing a South American kind of Bitcoin kind of super group essentially.
Yeah, the much bigger country, El Salvador. Yeah, it was a surprise. He's been an up and coming candidate. He's a libertarian economist, but he got 30.5% of the votes in the primaries over the main conservative opposition bloc, which at 28%, and the ruling bloc, Peronis, got 27. Argentina is in the middle of an economic crisis. They have 115% inflation. And Malay 52 has attracted support by calling for Argentina to replace the peso with the US dollar, actually, but also for his support for Bitcoin. He's pro US dollar, unlike El Salvador's president, but both are enthusiastic supporters of Bitcoin. He's got a lot of really interesting quotes against central banks and pro Bitcoin. But one of the interesting things, the overarching thing to me, was this trend that's emerging that pro Bitcoin candidates are emerging as viable options, not just in Argentina, but around the globe. And we have this with DeSantis and Kennedy in the United States, and now Milei in Argentina, which is a G20 nation.
Yeah, it's pretty big to have to have a pro Bitcoin candidate emerge. To be fair, I think Argentina is probably one of the best test cases for if pro Bitcoin candidates can win, especially in lieu of the fact that they're facing massive runaway inflation. So it could be really interesting to see what happens in Argentina and what this means for every other country it's maybe facing inflation, whether in Africa or otherwise.
It's definitely an election to watch. So we'll see how things develop in Argentina. And other news, a couple of blockchain mysteries. Last week, we had an anniversary of sorts. So Hal Finney posted his last post on bitcointalk.org on August 9th, 2013. So 10 years ago. And he is one of the candidates for who is Satoshi Nakamoto. And part of the reason why is because he took the first transaction and I think was the first person to download it. I'm not 100% sure about that, but he's one of the first person to mine it. And the first test transaction was between him and Satoshi Nakamoto. So the bitcointalk.org post was him replying, and the thread was about called old people. How did you protect purchases before widespread use of credit cards? And he responded to this. It was just like, we use checks or cashier's checks. But when I was looking into it, I looked at his last post that he started, and it was actually really interesting. It was like a page long document, and it really summed up his last 4 years in coin. So from 2013 to the 4 years prior, pretty much to when it came out, 2008, 2009. And he did make it's a really interesting read. We'll post it in the notes. I recommend reading it. Both happy and sad. Talks about just his whole life and kind of what became. He got Lou Gehrig's disease. But anyway, he does comment on Satoshi, and I thought I'd just read that quote since we're still talking about the mystery of Satoshi. He says, and here's a quote: "Today, Satoshi's true identity has become a mystery. But at the time, I thought I was dealing with a young man of Japanese ancestry who was very smart and sincere. I've had the good fortune to know many brilliant people over the course of my life, so I recognize the signs." End quote. So that's what he said about Satoshi. But it's an interesting read. I check it out. I think Hal Finney is still considered, but potentially one of the candidates for Satoshi.
Yeah, he's still considered one of the candidates. There I think that post is very interesting because it suggests that what who he thought was Satoshi is not, but who knows?
Yeah, when I read it, I did not get the feeling that he was Satoshi, but that's just, who knows? I mean, it's
That's
still a
our
mystery
take.
right now.
Yeah.
But in the other story we have, that's a bit of a mystery going on right now, is someone is burning ETH and NFTs. There's a crypto user who last week burned 2,500 ETH worth $4.5 million. Then a few days later, the same unknown individual using the Ethereum name service ND4.ETH destroyed another 3.3 million worth of GMX and GNS tokens, as well as several valuable non-fungible tokens. And we're talking like high-end NFTs, like the highest end Ethereum NFTs. And the identity and reason are a complete mystery.
That is really weird. Unless he's got like a massive tax burden that he needs to defer because he's made too much money. I don't see any reason, and we're not exactly that close to tax season.
When the story first came out, it was something about, oh, someone's pissed at their boyfriend or girlfriend and they're doing this, like sabotage as a potential motive. But it's all 100% speculation. But they're sending it to a burn address, which is essentially an address that has no owner. So they still technically exist, but they're sending them just into, like, off the cliff.
That's so strange.
But a lot of money.
Absolutely.
All right, moving on. Speaking of mysteries, the SEC punts on the ARC22 shares spot Bitcoin ETFs. So they're still not approving or denying.
Yeah, this was expected. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. We were expecting them to pull this move and say, no, we're not going to make a decision because they need some more time because they have no clue what they're doing.
Yeah, it's like it was the priced in move. That's what everyone was expecting. So it didn't move the markets, but they delayed the decision, opening up a 21-day comment period as I guess technically how they're doing it. But it's interesting because ARC originally filed for the ETF in May, and this gives the SEC a maximum of 240 days, and they're considered first in line. Kathy Wood did say, who's the CEO of ARC, expected a delay. The next kind of person on the list is BlackRock and Bitwise, with decisions expected to come in not decisions, but the first possibility of accept, decline, or delay coming in early September. And she's predicted that when they do, that there will be spot ETFs approved, but it'll be more than one. So maybe this kind of falls in line. It pushes it back so that they can approve more than one, not just hers.
Yeah, I mean, if you push back the others by at least 45 days, you start getting calendars that line up just a little bit closer. And I think there's definitely a possibility.
The final deadlines for ARC is January 10th. And the final for, say, like BlackRock, the other one everyone's watching, would be March 15th. But the first deadlines for BlackRock is early September, and then again in October, and also in early January. But yeah, like you said, they're starting to line up a little bit. So we'll see how it plays out.
Exactly. I'm intrigued. I still don't think we'll see an approval until probably March next year or maybe January.
Yeah, if they just like officially decline ARC, then there's 6 or 7 that they could approve multiples and just leave out ARC. It wouldn't be like, oh, we're just approving BlackRock, which would look a little bit shady. I think that would be the one where it's like, how come BlackRock got approved after all this time?
Exactly.
All right, we have some Bitcoin news in the realm of game theory. A U.S. bank, SoFi, it was just revealed, holds 170 million in crypto. Did you see this story?
I've seen talk about SoFi and that they're holding crypto. I think it's really interesting, especially because they're a modern bank where they don't really have branches. So
Mhm.
they've been taking off because of like lower fees and everything. So this is interesting to see that they're also a big kind of proponent of Bitcoin and crypto as a whole.
Yeah, they're one of the faster growing banks. It was revealed that they hold Bitcoin, ETH, Litecoin, Cardano, Solana, and even Dogecoin. They have 82 million in Bitcoin, 55 million in Ethereum, and Dogecoin surprisingly was their third largest holding with 5 million in Cardano. SoFi does allow you to invest part of your direct deposit into digital assets with no fees. So if you're doing a direct deposit with them, but yeah, I have a coworker who uses SoFi. Yeah, he goes to Long to deposit because there's no branches. So he'll go into the drugstore to make deposits, like cash deposits and stuff like that. So interesting.
Very
But
interesting.
but they are growing. They're gaining some traction just in terms of new users. But in other news, SoFi had some comments about regulation. They've grown increasingly cautious about the US Securities and Exchange Commission's scrutiny over digital assets, even saying that it may be forced to cease trading in certain types. Currently, they support Bitcoin, ETH, Doge, Litecoin, and Ethereum Classic. But recently, they used to support Solana and ADA, but they were removed from the platform on June 9th, just showing that they will remove things. And this is around the same time US regulators.
Had listed them as potential securities. Yeah, that's not surprising.
Yeah, they were mentioned, not like officially, but they were mentioned in lawsuits or that these are these constitute securities. But anyway, SoFi is trying to walk that line of expanding with the crypto market, but trying to stay on the side of regulators because they are a publicly traded company and a bank in the United States. It's a tough line to walk right now, the way the regulators are treating it.
Oh, yeah. Very interesting to see what they're going to do.
Yeah, it's an interesting bank to follow in terms of how they navigate this landscape. I can almost imagine them someday going like the Bitcoin only while they wait till the dust settles. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Or ETH. I don't know. But yeah,
I don't know if that's that unexpected. Like, I could see that happening.
what to go just to Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Yeah, they asked that of Coinbase, supposedly. Some banks may say, okay. We'll do-
Yeah, but I also wonder if we see something like maybe we see ETH because ETH seems to be kind of sneaking around now, especially because PayPal stablecoins on ETH.
Mm.
We're also seeing like Coinbase launch Base, which is like an ETH layer 2. So ETH might also sneak in there. That's been a discussion that I've started to see, is that ETH is starting to fit into that same category as Bitcoin, even though there are maybe some more resemblances to other platforms.
No, fair. And they certainly have some firepower, have a lot of funding, Ethereum, probably some lobbying power. So it's not hard to believe.
Yeah.
But in staying in kind of the game theory realm, Boya Interactive, which is a Hong Kong based company, they're a prominent player in e gaming. They have announced it will allocate a $5 million budget for cryptocurrency investments. So they're investing for their company, not a new service. They're not launching a stablecoin. They're just buying it. Boya made the announcement in a public letter to its stakeholders and potential investors. They're going in this letter, they also stated they're going to immediately focus on Bitcoin and ETH, like we just mentioned, from authorized trading platforms.
So
But
Coinbase.
go ahead.
So probably Coinbase.
Interesting, yeah. And then the company does envision this as investment assets, but also sees it as potential catalyst for future corporate developments, just as a way to get involved and expand into Web3 as Web3 grows, it sounds. But yeah, exciting. And then this is Hong Kong news. I know there's been a lot of hype the past year about what's going to come out of Hong Kong.
Yeah, there's a lot of hype coming out of Hong Kong. That's hard to ignore.
This is $5 million worth of hype.
Exactly. It's not a huge amount thinking about what the total market cap of Bitcoin is and everything, but it's still money and businesses deciding to invest into Bitcoin themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting thing too.
I
to
think
think
that's the big
about.
point there is that they're treating it, they're going to hold it on their balance sheet. So it's just more, it may not, 5 million in and of itself may not be a lot, but if more and more companies are each chipping in that 0.5% or 1% or even 0.25%, these millions will start that up.
Absolutely. I think that's I think that's one of the arguments that we're going to keep seeing with people in and around crypto. And just, yeah, they're going to hold it on their balance sheet, and that's institutional adoption. They don't necessarily need to be using the network, but
Right.
if they're
Holding.
holding it on their balance sheet, then why not? Show something.
And just to finish off this kind of game theory section, CoinGecko has a list. I've never seen this before, but they have a list. There are now 24 companies on it, but there are 24 publicly traded companies around the world that are buying just Bitcoin. They're buying Bitcoin as part of their corporate treasuries. MicroStrategy is obviously like a big leader in this, and there's a lot of mining companies, other companies as well. I thought it was an interesting list. And just the fact that there's now 24 companies on this list. And Boya was not one of them, so maybe they'll have to get added and then move up to 25 here soon, and maybe a year from now, what, maybe that number 10x's?
Maybe
Something like that.
10x's, maybe 100x's. You
Yeah, I
think
mean,
about BlackRock, just think about the 4 or 5 ETFs.
right, 24 is such a small number, 24 companies. But it used to only be Tesla, MicroStrategy. There used to only be a couple, so it really has 10x already, even in a bear market.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And talking about things that are kind of 10xing, let's talk about the stablecoin market. We've gone from just Circle and Tether, essentially, to Circle, Tether, PYUSD, PayPal USD, and FDUSD, First Digital USD, in a matter of a couple weeks. So that's a good 2x. Maybe we're not that far from a 10x here either in the market. And broker Bernstein said in a research report that they're expecting the stablecoin market to hit 2.8 trillion in the next 5 years from about 125 billion now. So that's a massive growth flywheel. That's way more than a 10x.
That's
That's
like a
almost a
20.
20x.
Mhm.
So that's a pretty big number for the stablecoin system. But Paxos has also made a whole bunch of interesting announcements. Have you seen this?
Yeah, they had an interesting, like, interview with Walter Hessert, head of strategy for Paxos. So there were teases, like, a little bit with Twitter. But basically what he said was that there are other projects in the works. And he was asked specifically what kind of projects. And he said, he wouldn't say specifically, but that they're focused on partners that will move the needle of mass adoption. So yeah, they didn't confirm or deny Elon Musk and X, formerly Twitter, but they did say we have quote unquote other white label stablecoin opportunities in the works.
Okay. That is definitely something to take note of because,
And PayPal is pretty big.
yeah, PayPal's big. And if they're looking for something else that'll move the needle, then Twitter and Meta would be big partners. If you think Google, Amazon, those are needle movers right there.
Yeah, it was a big enough needle mover with PayPal that we had Maxine Waters come out and I am deeply concerned that PayPal has chosen to launch its own stablecoin while there is still no financial framework for regulation. PayPal, with 435 million customers globally, exceeds the number of online accounts of all the mega banks combined. This thing came out with PayPal, and she immediately came out and said that. And she also mentioned the stablecoin bill from Republicans. So I thought it was interesting. We'll get into that a little bit with some of these stories. So Maxine Waters, she's like the chair of the House Committee on Financial Services, or a ranking member on it. She said the Republican bill has no chance of actually being signed into law, and urged Chair McHenry and the committee Republicans to come back to the negotiating table to craft a bill that actually works. I know that there's some excitement that this thing move forward, and just any talk about regulation is probably good talk in the sense things are moving, but it's still divided along party lines and maybe not get too excited about this one bill in particular, but they can always go back and renegotiate.
Yeah, that's it. They can always go back and renegotiate, and I think that's always interesting. But I don't know if she's right that the bill is dead in the water. I feel like there's probably more going on, and I feel like it's just some posturing. They've had enough time to come up with regulation, and the fact that they haven't, that's almost their own fault, that they've
Mm.
been too distracted handling other stuff, or being too preoccupied in fighting to actually get things done.
It is in the House, a Republican-controlled House, so they were able to get it through there, but on the Senate side, it's controlled by the Democrat, and right now, we currently have president. They've had to get past him, and he has not been very supportive of crypto, so it's hard to imagine this law getting all the way through all that without being changed. This could be the starting point. But yeah, speaking of legislation that comes from not lawmakers, the Federal Reserve has issued new rules in regards to stablecoins for state banks. But the bill that was passed by Congress may affect. Anyway, the Fed regulations for state chartered banks now mandate that these institutions obtain a non-objection letter from the Fed before issuing, holding, or transacting with stable coins for payments. Now, according to Cody Carbone, Vice President of Policy at the Chamber of Digital Commerce, the Fed's new rules would essentially grant the central bank unlimited authority. They just give them power over issuing stablecoins from these state banks.
I mean, it makes
However,
sense. By saying that you need a letter of non-objection, it basically means, hey, you need to tell us about it before you do it, which I think they're accusing New York State of not doing, because PYUSD was approved in New York. And then they're saying, if we don't agree with what you're doing, we can object however much we want. And that's something to be careful of. And I think it's very much them exerting their power over the banks so that we don't see more of these stable coins necessarily roll out just yet.
it'll be interesting to see how this plays out because you have the Federal Reserve, which can't make laws, but then you have the House and they're trying to make laws, but they can issue these rules. They have the authority to do it. Yeah, it would be interesting to see how this plays out. And then you have the federal government where it seems like they're inclined to not allow any kind of stable coin because they issue the dollars. So they're only going to want like a CBDC, you would think. They want
but
that power.
you'd think, but that's not necessarily for sure. But yeah, there's definitely some very interesting things going on in there, and how this could be like a really massive leverage point for the federal bank, for the central bank, and the Federal
Reserve. Encompassing all that, or just a story that kind of brings a lot of these things into play. We have Circle stablecoin. The story came out this week. They're sitting on $1 billion in cash. The amount of Circle USD in circulation has plunged from 20 to 26 billion, from 45 billion from the beginning of the year during this bear market.
So cut by basically half.
Yeah. Now this was driven by about a year ago a decision they made.
No, it was a
or
decision by
not they made,
Binance to
Right.
switch to BUSD only on their platform, which
Right.
I mean, yeah, some of these big trading platforms are major drivers of stablecoin usage because people will store their dollars in stablecoin, and if Binance, which controls almost 70% of trading volume,
Huge.
chooses to cut them from their platform, then yeah, you'll see a decrease in stablecoin volume. That's where a lot of Tether's trading volume's coming from, because essentially most, not all trading platforms use Tether
Yes.
rather than any other stablecoin. And with BUSD also being pulled from circulation, Binance has essentially had to shut down most of its BUSD pools. And so we're now just seeing Tether pools, essentially. And so some of that kind of love that was being spread between BUSD and Tether is now just being shifted to Tether because it was taken away from, USDC was taken away from Binance. But I think what's interesting is, despite it being 70%, Binance being 70% of the market for trading, we're seeing only a 50% drop in USDC usage, which to me suggests that they're seeing potentially adoption within DeFi and outside of trading platforms, whereas Tether maybe isn't doing that, at least not, or maybe not nearly as much.
It seems like Circle will have to deal. They're a U.S. based company, so they'll have to deal with whatever regulations come out, and that's not clear. But the other thing that drove down their market share was news in March, where Circle was revealed they had their $3.3 billion exposure to the collapsed Silicon Valley Bank, triggered that brief depeg and caused a big shakeup with USDC coin.
Yeah, that's definitely something to shake out, but they did retrieve their funds and they absolutely
It
repaid.
didn't break them. It could have, and it did not.
To me, that's a pretty good sign that,
like a good stress test for them that they were able to survive.
yeah, exactly. And it wasn't like a minor depeg. It was still, I think, 13 or at least 14 cents.
It was a big happened. I do remember it.
Yeah, I know some people that made some good money on it because they shorted it down and then they punch and longed it back up to $1.
This announcement, they had 779 million in revenue in the first half of the year. So they're still
which is more than which is more than they made in 2022. So
right, with half the market share.
With half the market share and only half the year. So
and now ending on $1 billion in cash on his balance sheet. And they made some comments as far as their new competition, the market share, they believe that their profitability and cash reserves will help. And they believe they have an advantage over companies and entities that will not be able to meet these kind of new global regulators tightening control over stablecoins, like this announcement from the Fed. So, for example, the Fed releasing new guidance, and you also have new laws, which still need to shake out from the House Financial Services Committee, and also in Europe, 2024. So just being able to adapt to all these new rules and stay compliant, a lot of these companies won't be able to do it, and Circle feels confident they can.
Yeah, I mean, I think Circle positioned. I think Tether is probably in that position where they, as much as they're seeing raising market share right now, they could see declining shares in their market cap as kind of these discussions about global regulation do come about, because I think that will negatively impact based on their reporting practices. And then, I mean, the kind of strength of being kind of adopted within the DeFi space and on all these blockchains, where as PYUSD and some of the new potential competitors aren't going to be in that position. They won't potentially draw that same attention or the same will adopt.
First move would help them.
Yeah.
It's the fact that they've been here and are already kind of ingrained with us degens who have been here for a while.
Absolutely.
Well, we can shift over to the kind of macro news for a little bit. There were some tweeting that Michael Burry is shorting the market. Did you see this?
I hadn't seen this until you told me about it. And I mean, along with a lot of conversation I'm seeing about people are still thinking that the market will dump because of recession fears. So the factory who has predicted 2 out of the 8 last recessions and was the one who shorted in 2008 with 92% of his portfolio. Pretty interesting.
It is interesting, but I see the movie The Big Short.
I haven't, but
oh well, part of it is how he had to sweat it, and before it worked. I mean, he was losing money like hand over fist for a while, because he was going to break, but it just wasn't breaking, and finally did. But however, he had people hounding him. He had investors demanding their money back, stuff like that. So, nerves. That's for sure.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. Maybe it goes with that kind of October, November crash that we might see again. I kind of predict mine. If we think about pre-halving. We usually double bottom before the halving, and we've only kind of single bottom so far. So do we double bottom maybe essentially a year apart? Market takes off in May, maybe. That could be
Well,
interesting.
I guess he's got 93% of his portfolio in puts or shorting the market, Nasdaq and the QQQ and the SPY. So interesting to see that. On research, these are just kind of some tweets I saw this morning. What else do we have in August 16th from the last meeting? So sometimes that moves the markets.
Yeah, that can definitely have an impact on the market. I'd say it's not common for something like that to have a pretty big. That's although are expecting such a big say from many just being made this time.
And then we had the CPI came out recently, ticked up a little bit, adding a little thing higher for longer and maybe even a rate increase, although we're not seeing that in the sentiment reports.
Yeah, CPI came in at 3.2% year over year, which was still below expectations of 3.3. It right on target, and the month over month numbers were right on cue, but it's still an uptick, and we haven't seen an uptick like this for some time. So it'd be interesting to kind of watch out and see we might happen as we kind of shift into the next season. Still watching. I still think we will see that extra rate hike that was predicting. He was predicting 2 rate hikes and so far. So maybe it's that expectations are 37% for that meeting for rates soon. Go.
Well, we're still over a month away from the next meeting. It's not till September 20th. So we got a ways to go. A lot can change. And the other big we mentioned last week is his yearly Jackson Hole speech coming. Chairman now on August 24th through the 26th, he'll be speaking. So another potential market mover.
Yeah, anything that might come out from that conversation, those meetings could be interesting. Especially if there's a discussion on recessions or interest rate potential damage to the banks. Very intrigued to see what comes from
Meeting. We can kind of ethereal markets a little bit. Their base, their layer 2. And they saw activity soar. Base daily active users hit a record high of 136,000. And about 175 million has been bridged to base since its inception. Last Wednesday saw just 10 million on its first day, but they have now overtaken rival blockchain Optimism, although it's built on Optimism. It's kind of weird. Daily active user.
It's built on the same on the Optimism stack, but it doesn't it's not on their blockchain per se.
Last Optim in terms of daily active users, and they're not far behind Arbitrum of 147,000 daily active users. There was some hype or friend.tech. Have you ever heard of this?
I've never heard of friend.tech, but that could just be my my ignorance.
But there's a social media app for sell shares tied to popular Twitter figures. It's a social media app which is in beta and requires a referral code. So there's this rumor that they're going to be releasing a token. So it's spurring a flurry of activity on this new chain. So that's driving some of the hype. Yeah. But anyway, I'd never heard of it. So kind of I just want to share. I have not interacted at all. A new social media, it's hard for these things to take off just because it's for them to be, very useful. But, base is a layer 2. You just never know. This could be the killer app that just does it all.
I mean, Base has had a significant amount of money that was bridged over before the official bridge was even launched. So we're seeing Base like really attract some attention, although I mean that kind of every new layer 2.
Yeah,
So
does it have any staying power? We'll see.
I
So this
think
is the first layer 2 from a
publicly traded company. So
yeah. So, I mean, oh, intriguing. Definitely keep an eye on it.
yeah, I'm not writing it off. I would not write off an effort like this from Coinbase very quickly.
But there's so many factors. I mean, they're silly right now. Like so many things could happen. Yeah.
And a lot of things can happen to anyone at any time. So it's I, I just don't think that Base will, even if they were sitting in a lawsuit, I don't think Base is the first thing that kind of comes to risk, especially now that the blockchain is live. When it was in development, sure, I could see them just choosing to cut it, but they've also announced that there's some pretty interesting potential partnerships related to Pola and Atari, uh, and this whole DeFi summer that they're
Do
talking
you
about.
think they're not going to launch a token because it creates a layer of like security against regulators?
Oh,
Or they don't have it?
absolutely. I think the reason why they haven't launched a token is specifically for protection against regulators. I think they know that would thing that they could do right now is to launch a token. So that's why they're
It's an
not.
interesting angle. I mean, you have Arbitrum, Optimism. They both airdropped them. It seems like that was kind of a way to insulate. It wasn't like a sale or whatever. They're giving them away, quote unquote. So, yeah, there is an interesting tactic.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting. And I'm
News comes from Visa. Visa's way to make paying Ethereum gas fees easier. This is from CoinDesk. Paying gas too complicated for your average users, people who aren't involved in this. And it has completed a new way to allow users to pay their gas fees in fiat currency using their credit card. Every time a user conducts a transaction on Ethereum, he or she must pay a gas fee that includes sending and receiving Ether, the native cryptocurrency on the Ethereum blockchain, and managing a ETH balance to cover those costs is quote unquote burdensome, according to Visa. So Visa is suggesting leveraging Ethereum's ERC 4337, the current standard that enables smart contracts on the blockchain to serve as wallets via a process called account abstraction and a paymaster contract. So a smart contract account that can sponsor gas fees on behalf of the user. The service will allow users to use a Visa card to pay directly for gas fees. The merchants or decentralized applications could run their paymaster system or use an existing wallet to make transactions easier. And the paymaster service providers could offer a choice of card-based gas fee payment among other options. So they're trying to make the user experience easier for kind of the regular person and encourage more mass adoption. That's what I'm hearing. It's hard for me to imagine an exact example, but they're trying to deal with that issue of how complicated it is to get involved in this space.
Yeah, which I think is really cool. I think that is one thing that could be well solved, and I think being a payment system is they're well placed to handle that kind of
Well, thank you for listening to Decentralized News. We post to YouTube first, so please consider subscribing to catch the videos as soon as they drop. Our goal is to provide unfiltered content that help foster genuine discussions that will help the entire space grow. Please remember this is not financial advice and we are not financial advisors. This show is presented for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please do your own research before making any investment decisions. Thanks for your support and stay tuned for the next episode.
Thank you, everybody.